Can you hear me? Good morning. I'm going to begin this session with a question. Where do you hear tall stories all the time? Well, I can think of three places. The parliament, the courtroom, and the local pub. And in which of these three places you hear the taller stories? The parliament, of course. Now, I hope I don't get arrested for saying this. Hopefully, the freedom of speech in Sri Lanka is alive and well, despite all the social, economic, and political turmoil we've been undergoing in recent years. Right. Now to get down to business, we are going to start with Lal, and he will talk about his own work and do a short reading as well. And you have 7 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Lal Medawattegedara, one syllable first name and a terrible second name. I think the best introduction to my writing would be my own writing. So let me read a short extract from my short story titled Tears of a Coffin Maker. This was the tsunami anniversary short story commissioned by the BBC Radio 4, and I'm going to read a short extract from that. This short story is based on a prison, Mathura prison, and when the waters came in, they opened the gates, and we are dealing with one person who is the coffin maker in the prison, and he meets this driver called Sarat who's looking for his wife. They couldn't find her, but they find a tree. They find a tree in the cemetery where lots of saris are sort of wrapped around the tree, and they find her sari wrapped in that tree, and they are going to cremate the sari. So it begins like this. Sarat made one last request. Please come for my wife's cremation. Cremation? You don't even have a body. I said nonchalantly as I could. I'm going to cremate her sari, he said calmly. What? I asked, wondering whether the man had lost his mind. Where? At the cemetery, where we found it. By nightfall, everyone left the town. I removed a wooden plank from a deserted shop which had escaped the wave. I broke into an abandoned hardware store and found some tools. Then I began to make a small coffin, the kind I usually make for infants. I had found a small tin of wood polish in the hardware shop, and I gave the coffin a good shine. Sarat never left my side. He watched me like a prison guard. He spoke to me only once during that time. Please carve her name on the lid. Making coffins at the prison had given a sense of purpose to my life there. I took great pride to achieve perfection. I carved my own patterns on the lids, usually flowers. I would polish a coffin until its surface caught the tiny shafts of sunlight that came through the workshop's windows. I can proudly say that Yamuna's coffin was such a work of art. The funeral ceremony was simple. Sarat chanted a few religious stanzas and thanked his wife profusely for the happiness she had brought him. They had been saving money to start a family soon. He promised to meet her in another life to continue that family. Sarat lit the small wooden pyre that held a coffin. The orange red of the fire mingled with the fiery twilight, and the smell of burning wood and nylon fabric mixed with the stench of the dead. Sarat sat silent and calm throughout the cremation. After some hours, He threw some water upon the cinders and collected the ashes. As he walked into the sunset near the beach, I felt an unfamiliar tightening in my throat. To my horror, I felt tears forming in my eyes. They remained there undecided for a few seconds and rolled down my cheeks. Sarat scattered the ashes on the sea. Thank you.
Next, we have Ciara to do a little talk plus reading from her own work.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Seneka. Thank you for being here, everyone. So I'm going to be reading two short extracts from two stories in this collection. The collection Keeping Time and Other Stories. So maybe like Lal, I'll just go into the reading and maybe just say a little bit afterwards. So the first story I'm going to be reading from is called When She's Older. And this takes place in a tailor's shop. And it starts with a woman and her young daughter going to this shop. When she is older. The room was a small box full of color. As they entered, Mohammed was standing behind the counter cutting cloth. Lalani liked the way he cut without cutting, holding the scissor and running the cloth against it so that the pieces of silk fell smoothly to either side. Sari jacket. Lalani shook her head. Hasita was half hiding behind her. She pulled her forward. For her. Lalani upended the black bag on the counter. The glittering material slid out, from darkness to light. Mohammed's eyebrows rose. A dress, Lalani said. Her hands sketched the air. He still looked surprised. Usually Hasita's dresses were functional, good material sewn to last, adequate, like the one she was wearing that day. Faded now after much washing, but it would serve her until she grew taller. This cloth had come to Lalani unexpectedly, a gift from a relative visiting. It was not something she would have bought herself. When her aunt gave her the package, she had peered inside the ugly white plastic bag, expecting a sensible sari or jacket material, getting ready to speak the usual phrases. Oh, thank you, so useful, just what I needed. And this had slid out. A dark blue-green material with a faint sheen that changed with the light. Cloth for a party dress. A dress with intricate embroidery and a flared skirt that would shimmer in the light. She had never had such a dress herself. It was not what Hasita needed. She didn't need a party dress. But faced with desire, need didn't enter into it at all. Lalani had run her fingers over the material and put it away carefully. I will keep it, she thought, for a good occasion. And one day she caught a glimpse of it as she opened the almirah door, and she wondered what good occasion she was waiting for. So I'm going to stop that extract there, and the second extract I'm going to read is from a story called Keeping Time, and that's the title story, the last story in the collection. And just to say that this is the very start of the story. So I think I'll just go straight into the reading. Keeping time. There are two faces. The face of the person and the face of the watch. With men it's easier. There are only a few decisions. Square or round, silver or gold. But with women it's different. Shape, size, color, black, brown, white, red, silver, gold, the choices are limitless. But sometimes people don't want new things, just the old ones reborn. I remember the woman who came into the shop a few weeks ago. She had a large watch with fake leather straps and she wanted the straps replaced. I could tell she wasn't going to buy a new one. There was nothing to fix in the watch. I like it when I have to open it up. There is something satisfying about taking off the cover and reaching in with delicate instruments. The girl came in just as we were about to close. I thought it was Maruf and looked up. The door was stuck and she hesitated, trying to push it open. The light fell across her face. I thought her hair had a yellow tinge and that startled me, but it was just a yellow scarf wrapped around her head. So, thank you.
Right, Ciara, you're next.
Hello, my name is Ciara and I would like to talk about and read from the first story in my collection, The Lanka Box. It is titled Of Concepts, Coconuts and the Blood of Christ. So to tell a little bit about the story, it's about an ordinary man who is street smart, who has a good command in English, but does not hold academic qualifications, ends up becoming a speech writer of a school rector because he decides to get a job at 47 and is thrown up in the hierarchy, like in the career ladder, until he ends up as a speechwriter of the Prime Minister. So I just wanted to talk about the power English has in a post-colonial English like ours, and wanted to deliberately use Sri Lankan English because that is the way we talk about. So I will start my reading. Of Concepts, Coconuts and the Blood of Christ. The day I turned 47, I decided I would get myself a job. I didn't want to be 50 and unemployed. I wanted to start the second half of my life as a bloody professional. Life goals. And that is how it all bloody started. But every time I applied to a job, they asked me two bloody questions. One, what were you doing all this time? And two, what qualifications have you got? Well, walking around the house, reading all the bloody newspapers and collecting fallen coconuts on the estate didn't add much to being a promising candidate. So, all I ever got were bloody smiles, either sarcastic smirks drawn or sympathetic lines drawn across their bloody uptight faces, glowing with the scintillation of everything they had, which I did not. What to do so? They didn't understand I wasn't there for the bloody money. Money I got from the estate. Not much, but how much money does a bachelor want for a monthly supply of rice, vegetables, beef, and Shiva's Regal Extra? And an occasional old arak. Because, after all, we have to respect the fact that we are bloody island folk. Anyway, none of these applications worked. And I went to my old school for help. I told the rector I could be a bookkeeper or a librarian or even a typist. The fellow stared at me expressionless for a couple of minutes, and I knew he was thinking about the donation my parents had made to build the colossal gymnasium some time back, even though it is currently used for a different purpose, to hold mass. He finally nodded. I tell you, his sigh was rather a sigh of relief. I was to be his speechwriter. Not bad, huh? And for 3 years, I wrote him speeches. Speeches to be delivered at general assemblies, college fees, blah, blah, blah. How many speeches must I have written? The fellow was excellent at giving sermons. So I thought my job would be easier, but good heavens, it was not. I've got to tell you, these priests, they don't understand that everyone doesn't want to go to heaven. That some of us are okay with going to hell. In this manner, by day I was his speechwriter, but you know what? At night, I was his herald of Amrita. The rector sure loved the blood of Christ. There's no bloody argument there. But sometimes the man needed his not quite holy spirit. You know what I mean, no? So I would bring him a bottle of Grants or Bacardi. Well, folks, that is why God created all the bloody grapes and the corn and the wheat and the barley, even the coconuts, before he created the man. Because those needed time for fermentation. You people have been reading the Bible your entire lives and never got that? Bloody loons of the first grade. Thank you.
My name is Seneka, and my approach is slightly different to the other three. I'm going to read from some prepared notes pertaining to the story that I'm going to read from, but I'm going to talk more and read less. So this is a particular story from my collection. The story that I'm going to read from is called A Legacy of Hatred. It is the last story in my book entitled The Beast and Other Stories, published by Saraswati. This story is different from the other stories in my book because it is a blend of fiction and non-fiction. Even though the story is only 9 pages long, there is a great deal of political history packed into it. The themes include politics, ethnic violence, art, depression, and suicide. The non-fiction part deals with a specific timeline in Sri Lanka's colonial and post-colonial history, culminating in the 1958 ethnic riots. Certain political landmarks figure prominently in this story, including the passing into law of the Sinhala-only Act in 1956 and the abrogation of the Bandaranaike-Tevanakan Pact in 1958. The latter half of the 50s was a turbulent period in Sri Lanka's early post-independence history, which is why it serves as a focal point for this story. The non-fiction component connects with the fiction component vis-a-vis a family living in Mineria. I chose Mineria as a point of intersection because one of the worst affected areas in respect of the 1958 ethnic riots was Polonnaruwa district. Although there was a great deal of violence in many parts of Polonnaruwa, including Mineria, the specific event I have described in my story is a product of my imagination. However, I should mention that some of the murders that occurred in Polonnaruwa and Radhapura and Ampara were extremely brutal, as reported by respected journalists. The narrator of the story is a 70-year-old man by the name of T.K. Mahanama, who was born in 1948. The narrator's parents are dead, and so is his younger sister, Pavitra. She was a self-taught watercolor artist who was so traumatized by what she witnessed in Mineria in 1958 that she became severely depressed. She never came out of the depression and eventually committed suicide. The last painting she produced depicts a thug slaughtering a pregnant woman in cold blood. A legacy of hatred is symbolized by this painting, which is titled Himsa, malevolence, the opposite of ahimsa, benevolence. Several decades later, T.K. Mahanama is putting it up for sale because he cannot bear to look at it anymore. Now, I will do a very short reading before we proceed to the next section. So this is T.K. Mahanama, the narrator. Life in the remote pastoral setting of Mineria was tranquil until the riots erupted. There was a great deal of violence in Polonnaruwa district, with Sinhalese mobs murdering Tamils in cold blood. We, my parents, Pavitra and I, had gone to the Pola to buy fresh fruit and vegetables when a Sinhalese mob, chanting the slogan, "One religion, one language, one nation arrived. Among the traders were some Tamils who tried to make a run for it, but the mob caught up with them and butchered them like cattle. The last victim was a young pregnant woman with attractive features who was a buyer, not a seller. It was assumed by the mob that she was a Tamil because she was wearing a bindi and a traditional salwar kameez suit. After being clubbed on the head with an iron pike, she was stripped naked. Then her belly was sliced open with a machete, and the fetus gouged out. A little boy with a tuft of black hair. We gazed in horror at the infant drowning in a pool of blood, with the umbilical cord still attached to his navel. His hapless mother was writhing in agony with her eyes bulging out, and it was only when her legs stopped twitching that we knew she was dead. I never imagined that human beings were capable of such extreme cruelty and hatred. We were all deeply traumatized, especially my sister, who had a nervous breakdown from which she never fully recovered. I did not have a mental breakdown, but came very close to it. My sister never went back to school due to frequent panic attacks and other anxiety-related ailments which plagued her for the rest of her life. My mother quit teaching her job so as to take care of Pavitra, but my poor Nangi sank deeper and deeper into the mire of depression, and at 16 years old committed suicide. A gentle, gifted soul ravaged by the claws of rabid Sinhala Buddhist chauvinism. Thank you. Right, now each of us is going to talk very briefly, just a couple of minutes each, about our favorite short story written by another author.
Yeah, thank you, Seneka. I have lots of short stories that I consider my favorite, but for the purpose of this event here, I brought this short story called The Encyclopedia of the Dead by this Yugoslavian writer called Danilo Kis. I don't know how to pronounce the name. Encyclopedia of the Dead is a story about a man going to Sweden on the invitation of a theatre organization, and he attends this performance by Sonata of the Dead by an unknown composer, and he goes and he's taken on a trip to the Royal Library where he encounters a book called The Encyclopedia of the Dead. When he starts turning pages, he realizes that the lives of all the ordinary people in the world are there, and with each room given to one letter of the alphabet. And he finds his father's entry, and suddenly he meets his father who had died, as he had never met him before. Now that's how the story goes. So I don't want to tell the whole story, but there's an interesting part there. His father has had a cancer, and he took up drawing towards the last stages of his life. He started drawing flower patterns, and he copies and there's a flower at the end of the book, at the end of the entry on his father, and he copies the flower, and his father's doctor, who happens to be a good friend, says that this is the exact pattern of the cancer your father had in his colon. So that's how it goes.
Okay, thank you, Lal. The problem with talking about a favorite short stories, as you say, it's difficult, really difficult to pick one. But in terms of things that may have influenced how I write, I want to talk about Zomesh Gunasekara's collection of short stories, Monkfish Moon, which was his first book. I read it when I was very young. I think I must have been maybe in my teens, and I read a lot. I read a lot of books, but most of the books I read were set in different universes, not in the Sri Lanka, not in the place I knew. So I think that was one of the first works of English fiction where I read the story that was describing things that I saw around me. So for that reason, I think that collection made an impression. And there's a particular story in it called Storm Petrel. It's a very short, very simple story. It's basically just a conversation between two people. A man is going into a bookshop and he meets a friend. They are both in London. And the friend starts telling him about how he plans to go back to Sri Lanka and open a guest house. And nothing actually happens except this conversation. But through the course of it, when you're reading, you understand that this man's dream of going home, he's not actually going to do it. But there is no explicit point where this is said. So I used to read and read that story to kind of try to understand. I thought it was a trick. Like, how do you say things without actually saying it? So I think I kept reading that story to try and understand how it was done. So I think for that reason, for both those reasons, that's a story that has stuck in my mind. But apart from that, there's also a lot of other stories that basically everything you read, I think, feeds into what you write. And your collection, Lal's collection, Window Cleaner's Soul, was another one actually that made a big impression on me when it came out, because it had a lot of social observation, but it was also very funny and it was very relatable. And I think for those reasons I remember that. And in more recent stories that I've been reading, I think there's a short story writer, George Saunders, an American writer, who I discovered only recently. And I think I like his stories because they are entirely different from what I write and other kind of stories that I've read. They're very funny, very unlike anything I would ever write. So I think reading something unlike what you write is also sometimes fun. So, thank you.
What I would like to talk about is the story A Private Experience, which comes in this collection, The Thing Around Your Neck by Chinamanda Ngozi Adichie. This is a very special collection for me because it was given to me by somebody very important. And this is one of the first few stories that inspired me to write short stories. So this story is about two women who connect at a very deeper level. These women come from very different backgrounds, different social classes, different ethnicities, but in a very brief moment, they create a bond between them where they hide inside a shop during the time of a riot. So, with very limited words and limited dialogue, the writer shows us that how these two women connect at this deeper level. So I think relationships between women are beautiful, and because they bond at very deep levels. So I think the writer brings out that in a very crafty manner. That is what inspired me the most, and also her unapologetic use of African English and the cultural element that you are like hit with over and over as you read the story. And also, especially what touched me was the fact that the writer makes use of small things like a glance, a smile, a thought that you decide not to say. So with very small, negligible things like that, she creates a beautiful story. So I think this will always be one of my favorite stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Ciara. We are running a bit behind schedule because we started late. So I'm going to keep my presentation very short for this particular part. One of my favorite short stories is called The Judgment by Franz Kafka. It was written in 1912 and is about 14 pages long. Hence, can be read in one sitting. The story revolves around the strange relationship between a man called George and his aging father. The themes include lack of communication, loneliness, guilt, anxiety, personal failure, and suicide. George's mother had died about 2 years ago, and his father is full of resentment because George does not appear to be missing her very much. The story is permeated with a brooding, foreboding quality which is found in most of Kafka's works. After sitting in his own room and writing a letter to a dear friend in Russia, informing him of his plans to get married. George goes into his father's bedroom to see how he is doing. They have a long and emotionally disturbing conversation which reveals the pathological nature of their relationship. Yet there are some tender moments, such as when George carries his father, a big-made man, from his chair to his bed. If Kafka has a trademark, it is his unique brand of dark humor that enriches the prose as well as the dialogue. Right. We're going to have one more part in this session before moving to the Q&A. So, we're going to talk a little bit about short stories. You know, what is a short story? And Lal is going to give some tips about how to write a good short story to would-be writers who are in this audience. So, Lal, would you like to have a go?
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I did a short story writing workshop with the Trinity College students in Kandy at the opening ceremony. So I'll talk about my experience there. I think, yeah, writing any text that sort of makes people laugh or cry is a very bold art. You need to make a blank page dance. You need to make a blank page dance and convince people. Somewhat like what the advertising writers do, but it's a little bit more serious here, or rather different here, right? Okay, one of the first things is my experience with students is working with teaching creative writing, which I've been doing since 2002, since my first book came out, is that, a lot of students or a lot of adults, they begin by imitating their favorite authors, imitating landscapes that they are unaware of, specifically the West. Yeah, that's a beginning. That's a very good beginning, because you need to imitate somebody. But at one point, you need to move into the territories that are familiar to you, where your acute, sensitive observations could be felt. That's what adds authenticity to a story. It adds authenticity because you have acutely observed what's happening there, and observation followed by writing. Those observations, they carry certain thoughts. I mean, short stories are not about words, sentences. No, when you read a short story, when you read a novel, you hear voices. You hear a voice deep underneath the text, and that voice is always disturbed. So I was telling at an audience yesterday, if you ever read Julian Barnes' the book called The Sense of an Ending, you hear a very powerful narrator's voice. That voice, it's very difficult to articulate what that voice is, but you hear the voice, and that voice stays with you till the end of the book. Now that's what you need to create. That's what we mean by a good short story. There's a voice. Sometimes the voice is scared. Psychologists tells us that Shakespeare's voice is there's certain kind of existential fear in the voice. That's the voice that you need to discover within you. And that journey is very hard. It's not as simple as telling ChatGPT, write me a short story. No, it's not that. It's not so easy. You need to discover that voice, and you need to nurture and encourage that voice. Perhaps this is why writers evolve as they go. If you have read writers, the total works of a writer, like for example, Rushdie, I have read all his works, there's a certain kind of evolution that goes on. That certain kind of evolution, you will also find this in music and art, certain kind of evolution if you map them. That is the voice you need to discover, where if you want to be a writer who can move other people. Okay, right. So that voice is what sort of attracts people, not your presentation, not the fact that I'm 12 and I've written 3 books. No, not those. The voice is what attracts you, and that voice is what makes you stay with the book. So whether it's a short story or a novel or even an essay, that voice is critical, and discovering that voice takes time. So that's why you start at one point, you start imitating writing about the things you like, and then you start moving into your deep thoughts. I think that I'm still also learning about the voice. I think that voice has a lot to do with you. It's as individual as your fingertips. So that voice has a lot to do with you. That voice has to be discovered, and you need to find a way of articulating that voice. It's that articulation and your voice and your selection of themes and your acute social observation, they all come into play. They all come into play on the text. And at the end of the day, that text has to move people. Then otherwise you fail the litmus test. Okay.
Thank you, Lal, for that excellent. Thank you, Lal, for the excellent presentation. So we now have 5 or 6 minutes for Q&A. Please go ahead. Any questions from the audience?
Unfortunately, a lot of the short stories we now read are on social media. So what has social media changed in the way short stories are? It's very, very short stories.
You can answer.
Well, in my point of view, like in my case, I don't think social media has affected, because I don't actually write stories on social media, but I think when we talk about social media, there are a lot of people writing on social media, but I think the style of writing in social media is different. But I don't think the stories have changed per se, but perhaps the way you cater to that audience is different. But as long as I think the message stays the same, because I think you have to adapt to certain rules and regulations and like certain styles when you're writing on social media, because you always have to catch the attention of the audience for a brief time, and you have to give them whatever you want within a very limited time, because we have to like concentrate like a huge amount of concepts or ideas into a couple of minutes. It is quite difficult. So I would like to look at social media as a way of maybe reaching out to a lot of people, and not particularly as a threat, but maybe as a tool.
Yeah, if I may add to that, social media is a medium, and it's a very important medium. Technology is very important, but I still think it's the voice, that individual voice of the writer. It doesn't matter what the medium is.
Thank you. Right. There's a mic.
Just to know, why is it difficult to write a short story more than a long one?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Why is it difficult to write a short story more than a long one?
More than a novel, okay.
Well, I haven't written a novel. I've written short stories, so I'm not sure that I'm the person to comment on the difference between the two. Maybe Lal can. But I think maybe the tough thing about a short story is you're trying to convey something obviously in a very concise, in a much shorter space than in a novel. So, I think in a short story, like a novel, you can have maybe multiple strands, many characters. In a short story, it's short, but you still have to be able to convey the same emotion and the same intensity that you might experience when you're reading a novel. So I think that's quite, in a certain sense, that's very difficult. But I think it also depends on the nature of each writer. There may be some writers who tend more towards the short story form. Alice Munro is one who's basically, and if you read her short stories, they are wonderful stories because each story is like a small novel. It's in a matter of say 20 or 30 pages, you get to know the characters, you get to know what they're experiencing as intensely as you do in a novel of about 150 pages. But that's a very hard thing to do. And I think, I haven't figured really how you do that really well. Do you want to add?
Yeah, we have time for one more question. That's it. Mike.
Hello. At the beginning of this discussion, I was given the impression by the chair that we are going to find out why the Sri Lankan writers stopped short at the short story but not dwell in the novel. I thought we were going to discover why the Sri Lankan writers stopped short at the short story but not dwell in the novel. Why
Well-
the Sri Lankan writers don't write novels and stick to
Well,
short stories?
I've written a couple of novels, and you have two as well. How about the two ladies? You know?
Actually, I could look at it overall. I think there's probably an even divide between novelists and short story writers. I mean, in Sri Lanka writing overall. I mean, if you just think of everything that's been written in recent years. In my case, why I write short stories is it's probably not a conscious choice. It's so how my story started. Usually, it starts with some curiosity about a place or a situation. And I used to write as a way of explaining things to myself. And some of these turned into short stories. It was not a conscious choice saying this will be a short story or this will become a novel. And one difference I've noted in my writing is the second collection of short stories is much longer than the first collection. So my stories are getting longer, so I don't know whether the next thing I write will be a short story or a novel, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm afraid it's time out. So thank you all for attending this session, and I hope you found it interesting as well as entertaining.